Yeah, still a lot of unanswered questions. And as we still continue to track the ongoing water crisis, a lot of people are wondering just how safe our water system is on Oahu moving forward. Well, Kat Riley is an environmental consultant who specializes in climate change and global sustainability. She studied around the world and actually wrote her graduate thesis while here on Oahu on long-term disaster recovery while she was at the East-West Center. So, Kat, thanks so much for being here. I know this is something that you've studied intensely, these long-term disasters. A lot of people worried about the overall damage to the water supply. Is this going to impact us island-wide? Kind of what do you make of the situation?
Right, Tom. So the short answer to this is no. This incident likely won't negatively impact the entire island's groundwater supply to the point that there is no naturally potable water available. And I can think of this being due to three main factors, which is like the longer answer here, not to get too scientific, but first, when it rains, water flows into the ground over time and recharges this aquifer. The groundwater flows in the same direction that gravity pulls, which is downward. So rain that falls on a mountain slope will flow downwards and can seep into the ground or be produced as runoff into the ocean or some above ground body of water. So with where Pearl Harbor is geographically located, groundwater, including contaminants, will likely be discharged seaward due to the aquifer's natural flow. To add a side note to this contamination in that area will likely become more concentrated, but this contamination follows the flow of the groundwater, essentially. Second, there are structures called geohydrologic barriers, which is a fancy way of saying physical barriers that interact with groundwater, which impedes its natural flow. So these natural barriers divide Oahu's aquifers into separate flow systems. So I believe there's about 5 or 6 separate aquifer systems that are further subdivided. So southern Oahu is divided between southeastern Oahu, for example. This means groundwater that flows through southern Oahu won't flow mountainward into the northern portion. There's impermeable rock that separates these systems. So you have this natural separation, and groundwater is also being recharged by the millions of gallons per day on the island. I kind of picture this as a sort of flushing experience over time. And lastly, I'm not sure exactly how much petroleum was leaked into the groundwater supply, but I assume that the release of the contaminated groundwater combined with any efforts that the EPA is going to handle will remedy the situation and will prevent an island-wide catastrophe.
So, I mean, you have the natural side of this with the aquifer, but then also, I mean, you have these pipes and these systems that have been in place for decades. So how could this have been prevented maybe, and what needs to happen in terms of infrastructure moving forward?
Right. So to answer your first question on how this could have been prevented, we need to first remember that this is not the first time groundwater contamination has occurred at this site and magnitude. There was a major leak, if some folks remember, from 2014, where the facility released 27,000 gallons of jet fuel, contaminated the groundwater supply. There's been smaller leaks during this year also that could have very well leached into the surrounding environment. But to calm anyone's nerves on this topic, the situation has been remedied in the short term, and people still pump drinking water from these same wells to this day. But those should have been red flags that more should have been done to upgrade this facility that was built during World War II. Interestingly enough, in 2014, there was a response to this with the administrative order on consent that the Navy signed with the EPA. But it wasn't until 2019 when the Navy submitted their proposal to upgrade the tanks. By late 2020, the EPA had rejected it. August 2021 came around, the Navy resubmitted it, and then 4 months later, we have this disaster. So this is a prime example, including the Navy's initial response when learning about the leak, that demonstrates this reactive behavior that is common, which is fix the issue when it arises, don't prepare for the unknown. Also this mindset of it's not that bad and it's not our top priority. We need to switch this mindset from reactive to proactive, which is going to be the only way forward. Regarding more on what we can do to move forward, this will need to happen on an individual and countywide level. Individually, realize that preparedness is critical. Hawaii is the most isolated island archipelago in the world. It can take upwards of 2 weeks for freight ships to arrive from the mainland. In the event of a major catastrophe, does Hawaii have the resources it needs to sustain its entire population during that time? Are you prepared or equipped with the supplies you need to survive over the next 2 weeks, right? Also remember that water is an extremely precious resource. I think back to the popular saying, 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. It's important for people to continue to put pressure on authorities to transition to systems that are less polluting and more resilient and which protect our water supply. And lastly, on a broader level, this facility is outdated, right? It was built during World War II. Fortunately, President Biden just signed the $1 trillion infrastructure bill, and millions of dollars are going to be funneled into Hawaii's infrastructure redevelopment. Some of these funds should really go towards finding the most practicable solution for strengthening, replacing, rebuilding the facility. It's alarming to me that when this occurred, the Navy sent their samples to the mainland for testing. I'm not sure if they're still waiting on those results, but this is also proof that we'll need to focus more on rapid testing technologies and building upon this culture of self-sufficiency. So in the long run, one of my main messages is the economic benefits derived from investing in structural resilience are far greater than this reactive approach to dealing with the issue once it arises, right? They've had to rehouse tens of thousands of families. There's costs associated with restoring the contaminated groundwater, public health response, ecosystem restoration, all that stuff. So I really hope this is that final wake-up call.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully it is that wake-up call. And Kat, we appreciate you breaking it all down for us. I know it's a complicated issue.
Definitely. Thank you for having me.